Hello, everyone. We're starting a little bit early tonight. We have a little bit of a sneak peek for you coming up shortly, so get ready. But tonight we're going to be talking about the Royal Navy aircraft carriers. And we have a whole bunch of different ships here from before really aircraft carriers were more of a conception all the way to into the late 1940s. So sit back and get ready. I'm not here alone tonight. I'm joined with TheSailingRobin, as per usual.
Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this stream. I'm really happy to be back here. As Princeblip mentioned, we have something special to show to you guys today. And well, I'm happy that you guys are here too. So I'm going to do my standard audio check to see if we are both loud and clear for you guys.
Yep. Can you hear us?
Yes.
And can you hear me, most importantly? We've got the lapel mic, and it can be different.
As you can see, Princeblip has put his entire historical attire, which I feel really ashamed of because here I am in a navy sweater. But one thing I want to ask Blip is please, can you wear the Christmas hat that's right behind your neck?
Oh man, there's a Christmas hat. I didn't even realize this.
Here we go. Now you're really in the oh, perfect. Oh yeah.
We got the whole Christmas mood going.
We got the real Christmas vibes going on.
And we got
So
my
yeah,
Shinji mug.
and the mug as well, definitely. So we will be back in about 1 minute and 30 seconds. You guys enjoy what we have in store for you.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas. I mean,
what do you think?
What do you think indeed, chat? I think there's a bit of a delay here. We're getting the reactions a few seconds afterward, but that's completely okay.
Mm-hmm.
So as the video showed, there's going to be actually more than 3 ships, but we have more ships in reserve as a surprise for you. There's going to be 3 new ships coming in the next update.
Yep.
So one of which is not really new. You guys have heard about it in the past. Minotaur will be
finally here.
Yeah.
Good things come to those who wait.
to the wait, exactly.
And Minotaur will be a campaign ship available. And this is going to be our first legendary tier ship in a campaign. So get hyped for that. However, it will also be available in the Bureau in the following update. So
Yes.
in the update after the campaign, it will be available in the Bureau for those who want to get their hands on it as well. So let those fears be assuaged a little bit. Everybody will be able to get their hands on this ship at some point or another.
Yep. And it's not the only British ship coming through. We also have the Tier 7 Lion that is coming in as a premium ship. There's more information to come about how the ship will be available. It will be in our patch notes relatively soon. And then we're going to have the Colbert. So I'm not going to say a lot of things about the Colbert. It is going to be available to a lot of people, but for a limited time. That's all I can say.
Yep.
The ship will be available for some sort of rental. And I think I already said too much. So Minotaur as a campaign, Lyon as a We don't know how it's going to be available yet, but it's a tier 7 premium, and it's going to be very hard hitting.
Yep.
And then the Colbert in a special rental. So
And note that the teaser trailer said 16-inch guns and not 16.5-inch guns, which makes for a very happy blip for Lion. And so, but yeah, without further ado, this is a live stream about history, so we're just going to be talking mostly about history. Robin's going to be playing some of the ships that we're talking about tonight in the background. I'm forcing him to play carriers, maybe regrettably, but we're going to take it away here. So, but I think first we'll let chat have a few questions if they have any questions about the teaser, which will be going live on our channel here in a few minutes as well.
So yeah, I mean, the video should be live on YouTube in about 4 minutes anyway, if you want to rewatch it, or just rewind the stream to watch the trailer again. But basically, yes, it is going to be the first legendary campaign. That's confirmed and guaranteed. So it's going to be a big campaign, quite long as well, but I'm sure you guys will enjoy it, because it's not the only thing coming with this update. There's a lot of things. As I told you in previous stream, guys, expect a lot of stuff. Now, as Princeblip said, we see lots of questions about mobile already. I would love, and we would love to address them. On the other hand, it's not the purpose of this stream. Princeblip takes a lot of time to read and have a lot of background work before these historical streams are brought to you. Yep. So I would ask for the chat to try to set the vibe for the stream and put yourself into the history of Royal Navy carriers. And listen to what Blip has to say, because if you've been present on the previous streams, you know that it's very interesting. So. We won't be able to answer any questions regarding mobile or anything else. Although, if you have any questions about the history and development of Royal Navy carriers, Blip right here is the man to answer them. Yep. So I guess we just get going.
Without further ado, disclaimer, I'm probably going to get something wrong because that's just the way these things go. We don't always have all the information available to us, even today after so many years, and almost, or rather, especially today after so many years have passed, and the people that are making these ships, serving on these ships, are increasingly no longer with us. So I want to preface that I might get some things wrong and some details here or there wrong, and that's the way it is. But I'm just going to reflect my understanding of what happened and the way that these ships were built and how they were more or less perceived in service and around the world. And so I have the Notebook of Wisdom returns. The primary sources for this video today are a huge shout out to the YouTube channel and website called Armored Carriers, spelled with a U, and ARMOUR rather than the American spelling of it. He's done a lot of research to bring public information about these carriers to light, and publishes them on his YouTube channel and on his website. Also, I have a book by David Hobbs called British Aircraft Carriers, Design, Development, and Service Histories. And those are the two primary sources for this stream tonight. There are other sources as well. David K. Brown's books, Nelson of Vanguard, and a little bit of the Grand Fleet cover these ships, and I consulted them a little bit, but less than in previous live streams.
So he's ready. That's the TLDR.
Hopefully. So British aircraft carrier history is a bit longer than other nations' because during World War I, they investigated a lot of the potential of air power, and including the first use of an aircraft during a naval battle. During the Battle of Jutland, HMS Engadine, I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly, but launched a single seaplane during the rough seas of that day, and that seaplane did not achieve much. But it was a first, and it showed the potential of what could have happened had things worked out in a better way. And there are several seaplane carriers that the Royal Navy puts into service during this war, including the first HMS Arc Royal, which was classified as an aircraft carrier, but isn't what we think of as an aircraft carrier. It was really just a seaplane tender. But according to various sources at the time, that's what they called them. So technically, you could call that an aircraft carrier. There's a bunch of different ships that have claims to be the first aircraft carrier, and we'll be talking about that as well tonight. And but going into throughout World War One, you have the development of HMS Furious, which we'll get to after Hermes, and that ship really starts and sets a lot of the trends for British aircraft carriers, and is, in my opinion, one of, if not the most important ship in this whole series tonight, which I'm glad that we have it in game to show. But Hermes starts development after World War One. So this is the 9th ship of the name Hermes, and it is the first purpose-built aircraft carrier laid down and designed. It's not the first one that is completed. There is difference.
By that, you mean that there were ships converted to carriers beforehand?
And there was a ship that was purposely designed as a carrier that was completed before Hermes was.
I see.
And that is Hosho.
Hosho, fair enough. Okay.
Hosho was not laid down before Hermes, but it was completed before Hermes and commissioned before Hermes.
So for the British Navy, it was the first designed, laid down, and completed purpose-built aircraft carrier.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, there's many different arguments about which carrier is first and which carrier has more true carrier lineage to it. Regardless, Hermes laid down first, Hosho completed first. Anything in between is up to your discretion. Most of the firsts completed in aircraft carriers are accredited to Furious anyway, so we'll get to that in a moment. So the whole of HMS Hermes is based on the Hawkins class cruisers, which we talked about in another stream, and which frankly isn't a very satisfactory hull form. The Royal Navy was not super pleased with that class of ship, but it was what they had. It was their most modern thing at the time, and it fulfilled their requirements for in terms of hull volume needed for an aircraft carrier, and which means that Hermes is somewhat slow for a carrier, and but it was a good starting point that set a lot of design trends and a lot of learning lessons through it. The original design was going to have both seaplanes and wheeled planes. If you can look at the stern of the ship real quick for us, Robin. That lower deck underneath the flight deck was originally going to be built for use with seaplanes and was going to be a flexible mount so that you could have seaplanes drive up and land or dock themselves into the aircraft carrier.
Oh, I think you showed me pictures of this rubber thing they would drag behind the ship and have the seaplanes kind of...
Yeah, there was a bunch of hope for this, but it wasn't going to work out, and they figured out that it wasn't going to work out before they completed it and redesigned it.
I see.
Because the problem with that is seaplanes, especially at this time, in the 20s, are very fragile. Like a slight pickup in the breeze and you're going to break a wing. It's not that. And the other thing is you have your engines right there, so it's a very turbulent waters, and it's just not going to work out if you have any sort of movement going on. And they recognized this and decided that's a bad idea. We shouldn't do that. But the requirements for seaplanes stick around, and that's potentially one of the weird things about it, about the Royal Navy carriers. And so there's, but also in the original design for Hermes, they were going to have 2 islands. So they were going to have an island on both the starboard and the port side of the aircraft carrier, where most carriers have it only on the starboard side. But this was early on in the development. They weren't quite sure what they were doing, and nobody had done this before. So what can be expected? And they did wind tunnel testing on the ship and found that that was a really bad idea. And it was a really bad idea because it's not only an obstruction in terms of wind flow and airflow and turbulence, it's also an obstruction in terms of what if the pilot messes up their landing? What do? So they luckily redesigned the ship and built it with 1 island instead. And by but then this is all going on during the end of World War I. By mid-1918, they kind of stopped work for a while and put it on pause. And they do these redesigns and then started up again in the 20s. And so by then they had already decided that their focus was going to be on wheeled aircraft, which was showing more potential, especially with HMS Furious.
So which are the planes I'm flying right now, if you have the model in mind?
So you're flying the Ferry Albacores, which are they were supposed to be the successor to the Swordfish. They weren't as satisfactory as they were hoping, as they hoped it would be. These are World War II aircraft. There might be a biplane, but they are designed for World War II, just what the Britain expected for the war. But ironically enough, these left service in the Royal Navy before the Swordfish did, even though it replaced the Swordfish. So that tells you anything about this, about the Albacore. And so, let's see. So the Hermes commissions in February of 1924. Hosho beats it by a few months. I believe that was September 1923 that it commissions in. The one thing with Hermes is that it has a reinforced flight deck, which is 25 millimeters thick. So it's not what you would call armored, but it is stronger than you would see in most, if not all, well, basically most Pacific aircraft carrier designs from the U.S. or the Japanese. And so, and that's one of the trends that goes on. We get into the armored carriers later. It's roughly 25 to 26 knots. You get more towards 24 knots by World War II, just because of wear and tear on the engines. It's fairly slow for an aircraft carrier, but one of the faster first attempts. And it sees a lot of interwar service in the Far East, seeing places like Wei Highway and Singapore and Japan and service out there, including an incident in Wei Highway in the 1930s where a certain famous American aircraft pilot, Charles Lindbergh, is in Wei Highway with HMS Hermes. He's flying a seaplane out there for some reason or another. Hermes offers to service the airplane and take care of it for him, and lifts Charles Lindbergh's airplane up with its crane, which is located behind the island of the ship. And a wind blows up and flips the plane over while it's on the crane and basically destroys it. So Hermes destroyed Charles Lindbergh's personal seaplane, which is which is not exactly a great thing to have, but it's a cool story regardless. This ship sees service during World War II. It was more or less a training ship beforehand, but they brought it back into service. It fights in the Battle of Dakar, which is where Richelieu was, the French battleship, and does some fighting against it while it's in port and not agreeable with the British at the time. And then it goes to the Indian Ocean during World War II and is the first ever aircraft carrier to be sunk by another aircraft carrier. It's also the only British aircraft carrier to be sunk by another aircraft carrier. So, but in kind of British aircraft carrier fashion, it takes an absolute beating before it goes down. It takes tens or dozens of bombs to go down, but eventually succumbs and goes down. It kind of shows that sort of British aircraft carriers are built tough. They might not look tough because Furious looks very ramshackle, but especially the later ships and the purely designed as an aircraft carrier ships are really quite durable designs. So I could drink here before we go on.
But you run out of breath, basically.
Yeah. I'm going to show a couple pictures here of Hermes. We've got her there. This is a view from behind the ship to the starboard. You can kind of see that the back aircraft elevator is in a capital T shape. It's a cruciform shape. That happens in a couple of the early British aircraft carriers, but it goes out of style because it's just not efficient, or not as efficient, but it's unique to these early carriers. But you can't see the other elevator. The front elevator is just a square shape. So another defining feature of this ship is the bow, where the flight deck meets the bow in a kind of a pointed shape, which is interesting aesthetically, but I'm not sure if it was quite liked in service or anything like that. The rounded down stern that you can just barely see at the left of this photo, it is done on a lot of British aircraft carriers, but not really for landing purposes in the way you would think. It is an aerodynamic shape. The idea behind that is to make the airflow less turbulent so that it's safer for pilots to land on. The cost of that is that you lose some of your effective flight deck space for parking planes and moving them around on the deck for organizational purposes. And later on, they decide to refit a lot of ships with a flatter stern and just have the cost of more turbulent airflow back there. So Robin here is showing attacking an enemy carrier or an enemy Hermes with Hermes. An interesting thing about this ship as well is that it has a very large island superstructure, which you can kind of see there, because it has a fire control tower on the top of it.
I'll show the model in port a bit later on.
Well, here I got a photo.
Oh, you got a photo. There we go.
So the tower on top of here is not the bridge. That's the fire control tower, because there's a bunch of 5.5-inch guns along the side, which are 140 millimeter guns, and it was considered at the time kind of excessive, and as you can tell, it's really dominating the skyline, but at the time, people thought that these carriers would probably be engaging destroyers or the cruisers, and they were worried about that sort of thing, and so got a fire control tower, and it never really went away.
Oh, get out of here, chat! I could have made a more perfect drop. I'm sorry. I'm getting a bit excited here, but RNG was like, "Hey, that's a nice destroyer you got here." Nope. Yeah, I got a hit. I got a hit.
Oh, you did get a hit.
Yeah, I did get a hit. Anyway, sorry, I digress.
Yeah. So, but Hermes is not technically the first aircraft carrier of the Royal Navy. In terms of at least ships that have the moniker, but it is the first purpose-designed one for them. But the ship that probably gets more firsts is HMS Furious.
We'll get to it in a second.
Yeah.
Let me just try to finish this Izokazi here.
So I guess, in Legends, the sort of defining characteristics of these ships is nice. Is having the horizontal bombing or the carpet bombing mechanic, which is better for setting fires than it is for dealing direct damage, and low speed, accurate torpedoes.
Oh, that's the wrong one. Not bad.
And so Furious is probably the most important aircraft carrier in terms of the development, because this is where a lot of the thinking goes down and also influences other navies, especially ones that had connections with the Royal Navy during the war, the US and Japan. And as Mobius mentions here, HMS Argus is the more conventional aircraft carrier in terms of appearance and conversion. I have chosen to omit her from the live stream, at least in terms of covering her, because she doesn't see very much service, though she is quite important. She has a flush deck, no island, but is conventional looking.
So, okay, so Hermes happens.
Yeah.
She sees some service during World War I,
World War II.
Say again.
World War II.
World War II, ma'am. How bad? And
Yeah.
then they realized that the car is like obsolete, or like what triggers the
Furious.
design of
Oh,
Furious,
Furious.
basically.
So Furious, let me see if I can find the photo here. Should be Furious 1, Furious 2. Furious. Yeah. So it should be this photo. So Furious is one of the courageous class battle cruisers. Some people put her in their own class. These are large light cruisers, quote unquote, large light cruisers. They are a battle cruiser with a somewhat shallow draft and 2 gun mounts. On Courageous and Glorious, those gun mounts are the 15-inch 42 twin gun mounts. On Furious, they were going to be 18-inch guns on a very small, thin hull, basically unarmored ship, and they were going to be single guns. So you had 2 total 18-inch guns.
One aft, one stern.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so
it's like a Monitor / battle cruiser / light cruiser.
yeah, and like and your armor belt thickness on this is 76 millimeters. So, which is the same amount of armor as Omaha, which is not a good place to be in whenever you're armed with a battleship grade gun. And so
It is the same armor in game.
And they recognize that Furious is probably a bad idea in terms of how it was originally designed. And already before they finish creating Furious during World War I, they put a flight deck at the front. You can see in this historical photo here. And so the rear turret is still there. So for a while, it is the most heavily armed aircraft carrier in history. But the reality is that those guns were going to have a reload speed of like 1 round every 4 minutes, and would be not, you can't get accurate salvo fire with 2 guns. Not to mention, you're probably going to warp the hull of the thing, because that was already a problem with the 15-inch guns. So
just a bad idea overall.
yeah, it was a bad idea. So they decided to make it into a flight deck on the forward end and keep the gun on the rear end for the beginning. And they do some flight trials with it, and they managed to successfully take off from it while underway. Let me get to my notes on Furious. And it was a flying off deck. So, but also, one really incredibly brave test pilot decides that he's going to land on this thing. And it's going to be on the flying off deck, on the front of the ship, around the superstructure, and then land on it.
Okay.
While the ship is moving.
So basically just come from the front of, oh no.
Yeah.
I think you explained to me that the story,
So-
he has to come from the back.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
So so this incredibly brave pilot, unfortunately I don't remember his name. What the plan is, Furious will be going at roughly 20 knots or above, and he will come up alongside in an approach of about 20 knots positive net speed, so it's going 40 knots in his Sopwith Pup, which is a relative of the famous Sopwith Camel, but not the same. And he's going to come up alongside the ship and come up front, and then he's just going to kick the rudder and then kill the engine and basically land on the ship. Keep in mind, he's doing this in an aircraft in World War I that is super lightweight, made of paper, and does not have a throttle.
Oh, so it's just full power or nothing.
Yeah. And so he has a blip switch, using the last portion of my name, but that's what they called it. It's a blip switch, and it basically allows you to cut the power for intervals and manage your speed that way. Not only that, this is a rotary engine, which means that there's a lot of torque pulling the plane to one side. So like this guy really has a pair of gonads. And he goes and he does it. He performs the first landing on a ship underway on HMS Furious. However, he tries to do it again and does not, he might successfully do it another time, but eventually he passes away, and the Royal Navy realizes that this is not a good idea, and we need to make some changes. And so they make some changes to it and they rebuild it again, and they keep the central funnel and the tower. They add a flight deck to the back of the thing, and they have rails that run along the side that you can move planes from the back of the ship to the front of the ship, around the side of the ship. So you take off from the front, you land on the back is the idea. So the idea doesn't work, and I think I might have a photo of that. No, yeah. So this is what it's like. You can see a blimp on the back end there. But they're flying off deck at the front. They've got some wind bars on the side to kind of protect the flying off aircraft, and a deck at the back. And you can see the kind of ramps that go around. You can fold up the wings and then move them along the side of the ship, and then unfold the wings and go from there. This was also a bad idea because then you run into turbulence problems where you have exhaust fumes, first off, coming out of the smokestack and into the pilot's eyes as they're trying to land. And also the super shower and structure causes airflow problems, and which is not good because you have basically a pocket of airflow where there's no airflow and surrounded by airflow, and it's not good. It's not good landing conditions. And they try to use this in operations during World War I. This is happening in 1918, if I remember right. And they lose a lot of planes and a lot of pilots, and in an operation. And a couple of them managed to land on land, but they realized very quickly that this is not a good idea, and we need to do more. And so they kind of keep it around, and they play around with ideas. They play around with the Hermes design, and they finally, in 1921 to 1925, they rebuild it in mostly the form that you see in game. And they take apart the superstructure, they redo the trunking on the funnels, they do a bunch of different changes, add 2 hangars, and completely transform the ship.
I think I may have hit both of them. Anyway, sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
I'm just having fun.
It's like you just conflicting roots of interest there. And so they redesign the ship. They have a flush flight deck. They do not have an island, and they build it in with a hump in the deck. So if you look on Furious in game, which
there's a slant, essentially.
Yeah, you see the flight deck, and it's going along and going along, and it goes up, and then it goes along, and there's just a random hump in the deck. People have asked me plenty, and I have asked myself, and other people in consulted things, and like, why did they put a hump in the deck there? The answer is just it's a break. If your airplane hasn't stopped yet, the ramp will stop you. Is the idea behind it. The U.S. Navy, by this point, has basically already developed a safety net system where it's just a crash barrier, which eventually the Royal Navy gets around to adopting in the 30s. But due to various political reasons, they couldn't adopt it at this time because the Royal Air Force was in charge of the aircraft and did not want them damaged in any way. And so this was the kludge design that they come up with. And so this is the way that Furious sees most of her service in. In the late 1930s, they add an island to one side of the ship, which is just a small little control island, really, for aircraft operations, and where the main bridge stays underneath the flight deck, where it originally was. And then Furious goes through and survives World War II, and Furious enough is the least capable of her class, but makes it through. And so, and it's a major rebuild. They have 1 flight deck. They have 2 hangars, and basically what they have is a hangar on top and a hangar below. They still have the requirement that it needs to be able to operate seaplanes. And the reason that the flight deck ends before the bow, about 2/3 of the way, is because they wanted to use the bow as a second second takeoff point. So the bow on Furious originally has access to the hangar, so you can just fly fighters off the bow for interception while you have stuff going on the top deck. However, by the 1930s, planes are too heavy to take off in that distance, and so that was an idea that was nixed, and they weld the door shut. But there was a lot of carriers at this time that used that idea. The Japanese did it in an even crazier way and had 3 flight decks on Kaga and Akagi before they got rebuilt. And boy, are those ugly ships like that. Furious stays ugly, unfortunately. I do not like Furious's design. I think it looks like a ramshackle put together piece of something or another. But it does its job. It works, and it teaches the Royal Navy how to operate an aircraft carrier. It's also the first aircraft carrier to do a night takeoff and landing, which is an important part of the Royal Navy's story, because by the time World War II starts, the Royal Navy is the only Navy that is capable of operating aircraft at nighttime by doctrine.
I'm just bad, chat. Don't worry about it. I'm just terrible at carriers. So
I
don't mind me.
am putting Robin out of his element here,
just ignore the gameplay, because right now I am literally useless to my team. Oh.
Yeah, Robin's modus operandi is killing carriers, not exactly
not
killing
really
great
playing
carriers.
them. I am not used to do that.
So let's see here. So, however, interestingly enough, Furious serves through World War II until September 1944. She is not sunk. She's just brought out of service. And if you ask me, it really tells something about a ship if the Royal Navy in World War II brings it out of service and does not bring it back into service. It was a very limited ship, and it was really overused. Well, not overused, but it saw a lot of service, a lot of sailing around. So, of course, the engines were blowing out. But they obviously did not see any reason to keep it around anymore, and brought it out of service. A lot of her experienced crew goes to HMS Implacable, and also Implacable's sister ship Indefatigable, and because all around the same time is when Implacable's getting going. And so she carries on in that sense, but in 1944, in September, she's more or less out of the Royal Navy. And especially, the Royal Navy is a group that is very carrier conscious by this time, or conscious at the time. They don't want to be getting rid of ships that can be used. But this ship is so used and also so old that they have to get rid of it by this point. And so Furious has 2 half-sisters. We mentioned them earlier, Courageous and Glorious. They're not built to the same spec as Furious, because they get rebuilt a little bit later. And let's see if I can show a picture. This picture. So this is, Furious is the bottom right one, and then Courageous, I think it is the top left one. Yeah, that's Courageous. And you can see that Courageous already has an island. It has a funnel attached to the island. Furious's funnels were routed from the boilers all the way through the side of the ship to the back. That's why the back end of the ship is so blackened in this photo. It's soot, basically, and exhaust. And you can see that in game. The problem with that is that the living conditions in the back of the ship were absolutely intolerable. They were horrible. Some temperatures described as reaching 63 degrees Celsius in the stern of the ship, which is approaching like 140 degrees Fahrenheit, 150 degrees, and you don't want to be living or working in a ship that is 63 degrees Celsius, or in anything that is that hot. And so there was a explicit want to redesign the ship, the Courageous and the Glorious, to have a external funnel. And so they do that. And there are, that's Courageous is a battle cruiser. And it's the same hull design basically as Furious, but they remake it into a more or less different aircraft carrier. The specifications are very similar. They can carry more aircraft than Furious can. They can operate more, but in terms of just like the raw specs and armor and that sort of thing, they're about the same. And I think they also have a level aircraft deck rather than Furious's angled one, but or ramped, but I could be wrong on that. And I think I have. Do I have another photo? That's Ark Royal. I'll get to there. There's another photo. Courageous and Glorious do not live long in the Second World War. I see a lot of service in the very beginning. Courageous is brought out in the beginning of World War II because the Royal Navy has this grand idea of using fleet aircraft carriers as anti-submarine war vessels, or warfare vessels, which is not a good idea because submarines are really good at killing aircraft carriers that are out in the open. And Courageous is the first carrier that's lost in World War II and gets sunk by a submarine. And teaches the Royal Navy that lesson very quickly. Do not use fleet aircraft carriers explicitly for anti-submarine warfare. It's a bad idea. Glorious, and that happens in, I want to say, late 1939, maybe the beginning of 1940, but I can't remember the exact date. I'm sorry. And then during the Norway campaign, Glorious gets sunk by the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau, mostly the Scharnhorst. And in a quite famous engagement where Glorious is caught out with no aircraft in the air and only 2 destroyers escorting her, the Acasta and the Ardent. Scharnhorst shoots Glorious at a record matching range of 26 kilometers. Sorry, 26,000 yards, 24 kilometers. And it's tied with at least one other, if not 2 other ships for that long distance range. The other being Warspite, and the third potential other being Monte Caccoli, though there is some disagreement on that one. But Glorious is sunk in that first battle, which I'm going to go out on a limb. It might be, in a sense, merciful for the historical outlook on the Royal Navy aircraft carriers that they would go down in this way, because I think personally in the Mediterranean, these ships would have had a lot of trouble just surviving in the Mediterranean climate and warfare, because they're not protected to the same standard that the later aircraft carriers were, and would have taken serious damage from bomb hits that Hans Geisler was dealing out to them. But we'll get more to that. And so the thing that comes after Courageous and Glorious, two stories about Courageous and Glorious. One is that you can tell a difference between the 2 of them visually. We have, this is the last known photo of Glorious, taken before she was sunk by Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. But you can't see quite the difference in that photo, as you can see in, just gonna get a torp run here on the Kotowski. I have a feeling that's gonna hurt. Well, yeah. Nice. And so the Courageous and Glorious, you can see here that this is Furious and Courageous. Courageous has a shorter flight deck than Glorious. So if you ever see in a photo Courageous and Glorious, you can tell which one is Glorious because her flight deck overhangs to the end of the stern, where Courageous is cut short a little bit and doesn't overhang as far because you use that area for seaplanes. and Glorious did not. So that's the way you can visually tell the difference between the two of them if you can see their sterns. The guns of Courageous and Glorious were reused. They were kept in storage after they rebuilt the ships, and they were reused to make the gun mounts for HMS Vanguard in the 40s. The forward guns on Vanguard were from Courageous, and the aft guns were from Glorious. So a little interesting tidbit there. The Royal Navy has a way of keeping things in storage that weren't used and reusing them at a later date. Furious's gun was used in the HMS Lord Clive, or not Lord Clive, but one of the Lloyd Clive class monitors.
Okay, sorry. When the bomb work, they do a lot.
The bomb work, good. And they have a curious way of reusing things, and a lot of miraculous boilers and weaponry shows up for the Courageous and Glorious and Furious in World War I, and that stays around again and gets miraculously used in World War II, and it's kind of interesting in that regard. So the like Courageous and Glorious probably would have been kept with the. I'm just going to respond here to back to port. They probably would have been used in the home street to allow the Illustrious class to go to the Mediterranean. However, I still would see that it would be very likely that they would go through or participate in the Mediterranean at some point during World War II. The Royal Navy had to cycle in carriers in and out of there all the time for damage or for other reasons or service elsewhere. If they were around, I have a feeling that they would be involved at some point or another, and it would not be good for them. The Royal Navy would have known that, really. So, and probably didn't want to have to do that, but they ended up sending Furious there. So if they can send Furious there, they would have sent those two there. And so I'm not quite convinced on that argument. But thankfully, these two ships lead on to HMS Arc Royal. These ships form the core of the interwar British naval aircraft arm, which is interesting enough because politically speaking, after World War I, they decide that aircraft of all kinds are going to be underneath the umbrella of the RAF, and the Royal Flying Corps and the Royal Navy, or not RFC, but the Royal Navy Flying Corps is disbanded for a time, which was a bad idea. But eventually in the late 1930s, they get to the point where they can retake that control back from the RAF and have their own aircraft and their own aircraft carriers again. But it does hamper a lot of things, including the development of arrestor wires and the development of crash barriers, which the US beat them to and the Japanese for that matter, by about a decade. And so not a great place to be in. But political will sometimes influences the navies. And in fact, a lot of times influences the navies. So how do they work out the naming system for the carriers? You'll notice the naming system for a lot of the Royal Navy aircraft carriers comes from the battle cruisers and and I believe personally that is reflected in terms because of Furious, Courageous, and Glorious being the first carriers. So they didn't change the names of them because technically it's bad luck to change the name of a ship after it's been built. And so I suspect that they just kind of kept on with that tradition. However, they go back and forth on this tradition later on. And you start to see ships like Eagle and, of course, there is HMS Eagle by this point. That's another aircraft carrier that we're omitting from this. It's converted from a battleship, kind of like Béarn from the French Navy. It's not a great ship, but it sees service. Anyhow, segue. The Royal Navy naming convention for carriers is generally what are called the virtues of a nation. We see Ark Royal is a historical name. In Old English, Ark Royal is the translation for Royal Ark, so it's the Ark for the Royals. But Ark Royal sounds cooler and is the Old English spelling of it and the traditional spelling of it. The other naming conventions that you have Furious, Courageous, Glorious. You have Illustrious, Formidable, Victorious, Indomitable, Implacable, Indefatigable. Many of these are battle cruiser names or famous names from the history of the Royal Navy, and are reused for that regard. Yeah. So we get to the Ark Royal. Ark Royal is a famous name in the Royal Navy because of this ship. It's, of course, famous for torpedoing the Bismarck and disabling its rudder, vastly contributing to the Royal Navy catching it and stopping it during its rampage. It's also famous for its actions against both the French fleet at Mers Kabir and at Dakar, as well as many other operations throughout World War II. It kind of becomes sort of the totem ship of the Royal Navy before it gets sunk by a submarine. And the thing is with Ark Royal is I have problems with this ship. It's famous. It gets operated exceptionally well. The crew of Ark Royal was undoubtedly very talented. The design I have problems with. The Ark Royal is definitely, it's one of the early second-gen aircraft carrier designs. Some people claim it's the first second-gen aircraft carrier, even though Yorktown beats it, in my opinion. It beats it to commission, it beats it in design and lay-down date, but some people make that claim. The thing with the Ark Royal is that the hangar layout and the elevator layout is just messed up in a lot of different ways. So Ark Royal is a conventional aircraft carrier, right? So and they wanted to make a big aircraft carrier that would be worth the money putting into to build from the ground up and would be operational for a long time. And so from the beginning, this is already kind of a suspicious warship, or in terms of or superstitious warship, because when they launch this ship, it takes 4 tries to break the bottle. And so, when you launch a warship, you have usually a notable lady will have a bottle. In American service, usually just a bottle of water. In other navies, it's a bottle of alcohol, and they will smash it on the front of the ship and break the bottle in the warship. In this case, the bottle takes 4 tries to break. He has to hit it several times, and that's and that's considered bad luck for the warship, but in a way that kind of represents the warship in another way. And so the thing with this ship is that it has it's commissioned in 1939 or 1938, just before the war, and it gets worked up and trained for the war and performs very well. It never had radar. Which, of course, at the time when it didn't have the ability to get radar because it really didn't exist yet for use in warships. And so during the war, it had to rely on other ships around it and do fighter control based off of radar from other cruisers around it, which is a very inventive way to do it, but a shortcoming of the ship itself, and reflects the abilities of the crew. But the hangar system, you have the introduction of the box hangar. And you have 2 hangars in Ark Royal, which is a recurring theme in Royal Navy warships. But you couldn't really, the elevators were at the front of the hangars. So you can't get aircraft from the back of the hangar to the front of the hangar easily in Ark Royal, because you have everything in the way, and you need to get it to the front in order to get it onto an elevator. But not only that, that applies to both the top hangar and the bottom hangar. And then the elevators only go up and down one floor. So each elevator has 2 different lifts on it. And so there's always a lift on the middle floor. And so in order to get a hangar or aircraft from the back to the bottom hangar, which was designed for deep storage, but that's not how aircraft carriers ended up working. It ended up cycling through aircraft through all the different hangars and the flight deck quite often. But to get it from the back of the bottom hangar, you have to move it through the bottom hangar onto the lift that has been loaded, and then raise it to the middle floor, move anything that's out of the way, and then move the plane off of the lift again. Drop the lift to the bottom, move the plane back onto the lift, and then lift it to the flight deck. And so this whole operation takes probably anywhere between 10 to 20 minutes. And so if you wanted to, and you can do that for one airplane. There are 3 aircraft or 3 elevators, so maybe you could do it for 3 at once. But it's a very slow and cumbersome way of moving aircraft from the bottom hangar, especially, and even from the middle hangar. You have to move things out of the way. There's a lot of organizational problems that this carrier has. And the reason it does that is so that they can offset the elevators. So I don't think I have a good picture of it from above. I have this picture here. You might be able to just see it, but the elevators are on each half of the flight deck. So you have 2 on the starboard side and 1 on the port side. So port being left.
This and this, right?
Yeah. So there are these squares here.
Oh, I'm dumb. Let me just go like this. Here we go.
There. And so you have it there. And they're not in the middle of the hangar because they wanted to have a support structure through the middle of the ship. And so, which is a good idea. It does make the ship stronger, which with such light of a carrier design that Ark Royal really is, it was a good idea to do that, but not for aircraft operations. And so this was never repeated again in a Royal Navy aircraft carrier. All subsequent Royal Navy aircraft carriers had 2 or more lifts, but never 3. And so, yeah, Baron has an even weirder setup than Ark Royal. I'll give Ark Royal that. It's not as bad as Baron, and it's not as bad as Furious or Courageous or Glorious. It's a good ship with good crew. It just has problems. It's not this immortal, legendary ship that people make it out to be. And so, the legend of Ark Royal is things that it does, not the ship that it is. And often I would argue that is the same case with Bismarck. You could even say it's the same case with some of the American battleships, notably the Iowas. It's like these ships oftentimes have problems that are clouded in a fog of propaganda. And Ark Royal is one of these ships that are just, it's an icon. And so to say anything against it is blasphemy. Why was Baron a bad carrier? Because it's French. No, I'm sorry. But Baron was a bad carrier because it was converted from a battleship. Not a battle cruiser, a battleship, which means, and at the time, French battleships were not good. In terms, they weren't good and they weren't fast. And so Baron inherits a bunch of these problems. It's not fast, it's too small, and it's not well set up. It's a first generation aircraft carrier, so it's not set up for flight deck operations in any way. The hangars are messed up. It's just so many different problems. So Baron, that's why Baron is not considered a good carrier, and it does not really see any notable service in World War II because people knew it wasn't a good aircraft carrier, and didn't want to, even though it was technically in service, they didn't want to do anything with it. And so the Ark Royal was famously sunk many times, according to German propaganda. A lot of these ships are, same thing with Enterprise, same thing with a few of the other ships. And so these, It has a speed of roughly 31 knots. It has a 4.88 meter tall hangar, which is just barely enough to operate most things, but if it had stayed in service longer and wasn't sunk, it would not be able to operate a F4U Corsair, which is what the Royal Navy kind of goes to towards the end of the war. It would have to be forced to operate other aircraft, like some other later carriers, and it has a bunch of other little small problems. It is technically protected on the flight deck. It has a 19 millimeter flight deck made of Gaulle steel, and so and this thing, and it has a, hang on.
Technical problem. Brain stopped working.
Yeah,
No.
brain has stopped working. I need water, and I've run out of water in this, so I need to go.
It is daunting. Don't get me wrong. It is daunting.
And so, but Ark Royal sees service until it's hit by a torpedo in 1942, and by, I think it was U-37, I want to say it was. And so it gets hit by a torpedo on the starboard side, and the torpedo defense system fails. It was designed for a 750-pound explosive. Probably wasn't that efficient, and it was compromised. And so the ship takes on a lot of water very quickly. The order to abandon ship is given very quickly, suspiciously so. And the problem unique to Ark Royal is that it does not have any diesel electric generation. All of its electric generation comes from the boilers. And so if there's any way, if those boilers are compromised in any way, the ship loses power. And so when you have a flooding ship happening, there's a decent likelihood that your boilers, which are in the lowest portion of the ship, are going to be encountering water. And then you have an added factor of the order to abandon ship was given. So you have 1,600 people leaving a ship and leaving doors open, not following procedure correctly, and also just being important people in the damage control party, not on the ship anymore. And so they fight and fight and fight. The fight to save the ship, but unfortunately the ship ends up listing too far to starboard, and then that's where the funnel intakes are. So when you have a row of boilers and an aircraft carrier that has the funnel on the right side of the aircraft carrier, so we're looking from behind, so on the starboard side of the aircraft carrier, you have a row of funnels, or row of boilers, and the funnels come up and they all intersect and go into trunk together into one big funnel that goes up, usually. That's how Ark Royal is designed. Problem is that there was also, is that when you take damage, you get shrapnel going on and that sort of stuff. And when Ark Royal starts to flood and sink and then lists over to the side, it fills these funnels up and puts out all the boilers. So you lose power. And so the problem, and so this was a problem recognized after the sinking and rectified in basically all subsequent aircraft carrier designs of the Royal Navy. But it dooms Ark Royal. And there are some other problems involved in this situation, but it's been hypothesized that if the destroyers helping the ship had stayed around and kept on supplying power, as well as if the order to abandon ship hadn't been given so early, and a few other things, that maybe possibly the ship could have been saved, but that's just not the way things played out, unfortunately. So Ark Royal was lost, and the at the time totem of the Royal Navy was lost with it. And so, and you can actually, there's actually a vision report from when the torpedo impact hit Ark Royal from the HMS Malaya, which was one of the Queen Elizabeth class battleships that was following behind the ship at about 400 yards. So you're talking half a kilometer vision, which is a long way for a human eye to see. Maybe some guy caught this out of binoculars, or I don't know. But when the torpedo hits the warship and strikes it, it is described that the deck visually whipped and sent aircraft on the deck flying into the air, and basically had a bunch of them jump into the air and land again. And in order for that to happen, first off, the aircraft had to be knocked off, or not tied down, so they had to have recently landed. And also, like, it had to be a tremendous amount of force transferred through the entire hull of the ship. Ark Royal was designed to be a high-capacity, lightweight ship, kind of like USS Wasp in a way, but not as lightly built as Wasp, and larger than Wasp. And in no way am I comparing Wasp to Ark Royal in terms of capability, but that's the sort of design philosophy I was going in. And so the torpedo just really did more damage than was expected. So the next totem, quote unquote, of the Royal Navy would be the Illustrious class armored aircraft carriers. And these are truly armored aircraft carriers. The belt armor is 4.5 inches thick. The flight deck across the hangar is 3 inches thick, 76 millimeters. 4.5 inches is roughly 120 millimeters. And the hangar deck, so the bottom of the hangar, is 2.5 inches thick. And so, and that runs over more of the ship than the core protection does. And so, the Illustrious class are Admiral Henderson's kind of brainchild. Admiral Henderson is a very important admiral. He was the third Sea Lord during the late 1930s, and he was more or less the man responsible for designing the Royal Navy fleet going into World War II. He knew that there was war coming. It came sooner than expected, but he knew there was war coming. He knew what he needed, what the Navy needed going into that war, and designed a lot of the more famous classes of warship that went into the war and helped or was involved in it. The Illustrious class is one of them that he especially cared about. And this is evident in how fast this ship was designed.
So dumb.
Immediately after the Ark Royal designs are done, Henderson orders the beginning of a new design, and he rushes it. 3 months later, after ordering the design drafts done to be done, they're completed. And then within a few months after that, the thing is approved and finalized. They get the order done within a year after the first order for designing the ship. Normally, it takes 2 or more years to even design the thing before it's even approved. So this is like an incredible pace of design work, and simply incredible. The only thing that I can think of offhand that compares to this in military and industrial complexes is the French designed a rifle in less than 5 months in 1886. Well, I think it was 1885 or 84, but it became the model 1886, the Lebel. The French Ordnance General ordered or said, I want a black powder rifle designed on my desk by May and January, and it was there by May 1st. And so this sort of incredible design development only happens in a few cases, and in a lot of these cases it's a very successful design. Some of these cases is not so successful, but this is just one of the incredible successful cases here. Like, so we get this design done in slam patch. They're on the slipways by 1937, if I remember right, or early 1938, one of the two. So they're constructing these ships, and they're going to build 3 of them, or sorry, they're going to build 4 of them. They're going to build Illustrious, Formidable, Victorious, and Indomitable. They decide later to redesign the Indomitable. We'll get to that. And so there are 3 main ships in the Illustrious class. Formidable, or Illustrious, Formidable, and Victorious. Technically, Victorious was supposed to come out before Formidable, but design delays led to Formidable coming out before Victorious. But, and Formidable is famous for being the ship that launched itself, or herself. Whenever she launched before she was supposed to, and this is often attributed to her weight, which has led to a series of gags about the ship, especially in Azur Lane, for those of you who play that, and that's why there's a bunch of weight memes about that ship. Not because it's overweight or anything, just because she was fat. She launched herself due to weight. And the physics of launching ceremonies are a fascinating topic that are very much more involved than just cutting a chain on a ship and letting it roll into the ocean. There's a lot of concerns that go on to it, and there's been a lot of interesting accidents and stories from ship launches throughout history. I encourage you to go look at it. There's quite a famous example where like ship launches cause minor tsunamis and flood towns, and run into things, and it's Robin is getting bullied by.
I'm trying to save my life, dude. It's not working. It's just
Help!
I mean, that Gajamada almost got me.
Help! I'm being oppressed.
My heart, man.
And
I mean, I am dead. There's no way I'm making that escape. What is that, Didi? And Asensio? Oh, there she is. Find her. I mean, I'm screwed anyway, but.
Goodbye. Have a great time. Oh no.
Detonation, please. Don't let me interrupt, man. It's
She's
fine.
not down at 80%. She can't detonate yet. But yeah. So Illustrious class comes along. It's an armored carrier design, and so this is the first Royal Navy like main carrier that has a single homogeneous hangar. This is not a thing that stays around in Royal Navy designs, but it's got a single hangar, 5 meters tall, which is enough to operate basically any aircraft that it's going to, even if it might be a squeeze, and it's armored, which is and it's an armored box. So essentially, at the top you have the flight deck, which is a 3-inch armored deck. Then you have the hangar, which is another layer of steel. It's a strength deck type thing, and then you have your hangar, and then at the bottom of the hangar you have a 2.5-inch deck, and below that you have the engine rooms and other spaces that are protected by essentially 2 layers of armor equivalent to 5.5 inches thick. The walls of the hangar are 4.5 inches thick, prevent external explosions from going external, or explosions that are external from going internal, because both are important in protecting an aircraft carrier. Look at IJ and Taisho, or Taiho rather. And there's an external belt armor of 4.5 inches thick. 4.5 inches is 120 millimeters. 3 inches is 75 or 76 millimeters. And so this is a lot of armor for an aircraft carrier, but it limits how many airplanes that these ships can operate. As designed, they were supposed to operate 36 aircraft. For context, equivalent aircraft or aircraft carriers at the time in, like, say, the United States Navy, you're going to be looking at like 70 aircraft minimum. However, U.S. Navy also counts deck parking, which is something that the Royal Navy does not count generally. And so, but in operational use, especially during the later part of the war, they managed to get into the 50s in terms of how many aircraft operational. But since it was a carrier designed for 36, it didn't necessarily have the avgas stowage. So you have to be able to fuel the airplanes, right? And so it didn't have the stowage of avgas to handle operating more than 50 aircraft for extended periods of time. But that was just a compromise of the design. And so then they added some extra avgas tanks, but not enough really to make up for how many extra aircraft and how thirsty aircraft became later in the war. So interestingly, part of, as well as the Fiji class cruisers, the armor decks for the flight decks were made not of British steel, but of Czech steel.
Czech steel.
Britain in 1938 had a lot of problems getting enough armor plate for all the ships that it was building because it was massively expanding and the industry had to expand with it, but it wasn't at the same pace. And so they order a series of, or order armor steel from the Czech Republic, and part of that makes up the flight decks of the Illustrious class aircraft carriers.
So we are nowhere near Implacable yet.
No.
Okay.
But you can play Implacable. We're close enough.
Okay, fair enough.
We're in the Illustrious class, so we're in between.
In between
Royal.
the two, fair enough.
And so the Czech armor comes from Vitkovice of Morava Ostrava. And essentially it manages miraculously to be completed and arrive before Germany invades Czechoslovakia. And so the first armored carriers are made with Czech steel involved, which is interesting because we are located in Prague, Czech Republic. So it's obligatory that I have to mention this. These aircraft carriers, Illustrious, Formidable, and Victorious, see service around the world and are exceptionally durable ships. They get beat to hell and come out surviving the war. And we'll get to a little bit more of the punishment that these ships take later. But I need to show you what one of these ships looked like. So this is, I believe this is Illustrious herself. In 1945. So this is in the Pacific, which notice the calm oceans, which is not what these ships were designed for. And then let's see if we can find other photos. This is Victorious in the Atlantic Ocean. Sea is not nearly as calm. And one thing that I got to say about aircraft carriers is that while not everybody loves them in World of Warships, they look good.
That they do.
Like,
I mean,
there's just something aesthetic about this photograph in particular, but also just an aircraft carrier operating aircraft. And so this is, I think that's a Indomitable. No, not sure. But this is how the Illustrious class looks. Kind of similar to the Implacable, but smaller. And so these carriers have a lot of interesting stories. Illustrious famously on July 1st, 1940, not July 1st, July 7th, no, not July, January 7th, 1941. If not the 7th, it's in January. Gets bombed to hell. Essentially, the German, or Illustrious, had moved into the Mediterranean, was doing operations there, and Italy didn't have a good way to respond to it. They enlist the help of the German Air Force, and the German Air Force sends the anti-shipping unit from Norway, Fliegerkorps 10, to Italy with the explicit order to sink HMS Illustrious. It's not sink British aircraft carriers. It's not sink British shipping. It's sink the Illustrious because it is causing problems. And so they set up a whole series of plans. And there's an excellent video on Armored Carriers' YouTube channel. Highly recommend. But I'm going to summarize. Set up an elaborate plan to sink this ship. They try a few times. The man in charge of Fliegerkorps 10 at this time is a certain commander, Hans Geisler, who features in World of Warships Legends as the German aircraft carrier commander. And so he sets up a plan where they are going to basically send a shadowing aircraft to go look at the ship before they send the attack wave. And what this does is it brings the fighter planes defending Illustrious down. And these are Fairey Fulmars, which are a two-seat fighter aircraft that's a very heavy plane. It takes time to get them up to altitude. And so the plan is that we're bringing down their fighter aircraft, and then we'll send the bomber waves while everything's down on the deck. And so and not only one bomber wave, but several, over a 10-minute time span. So nothing has time to get into the air and get high enough to intercept us. They do this. They send a first wave of Ju-87s in. Most of these are Ju-87 Stuka bombers, dive bombers. And the first wave has anti-personnel bombs that shatter on the deck or explode on the deck and disable anti-aircraft crew, clearing the way for the next wave of armor-piercing bomb-dropping bombers, or dive bombers. These come in and attack Illustrious, all within a 10-minute time span, back to back to back. And Illustrious takes many bomb hits. She takes, in this first wave, she takes 2 bomb hits down the aft elevator into the hangar, basically. And that sets a whole series of explosions and fires going on inside the Illustrious. And this is on the stern of the ship. Another bomb hits the stern of the ship as well. And another bomb penetrates the armored deck in the middle of the ship and detonates inside the hangar, again, on the bottom hangar deck. And another one explodes in the bow of the ship, ruining stuff there. We have a picture of that. Here, no, not there. Not there, that's Ark Royal. Not there, it's here. So this is Illustrious's bow after this attack. Not pretty. And so this has disabled the ship. It is in full damage control mode. But the armored decks have protected the ship from taking any damage to its boilers and engine rooms. And so while there's fires raging above them, the engineering crew is keeping power to the ship throughout this, at detriment to their own lives and at detriment to their own health. They keep it going. And so not only that, but another wave of bombs attacks, causing damage due to near misses, as well as another bomb makes it down into the hangar deck through the aft elevator again. So 3 bombs make it into an elevator and into the bottom of the elevator and detonate. And these aren't just like itty bitty bombs either. These are 200 and 500 kilogram bombs. So we're talking 550 pounds to 1,100 pound bombs going off inside of an aircraft carrier. And the ship survives, sails to Malta, 18 miles away.
Excuse me.
Gets bombed in Malta. When it arrives in Malta, it is described that the stern of this ship is glowing orange, melting, basically. Survives that. Gets out of Malta, sails to the United States, and gets rebuilt in Newport News, United States, and then serves for the rest of the war. Like, Illustrious is a ridiculous ship that takes a lot of damage. That is an incredible story of damage control, determination, and things going on. Interesting tidbit about the way that these British hangars were set up is they had a safety feature, what they thought was a safety feature, of fire curtains. So you know how on the side of the street in businesses or in a mall, businesses have like a garage door type thing that closes over the front of the business at nighttime. Think of that. So it's a garage door type thing with a bunch of different layers that folds down and separates parts of the hangar off from each other, called a fire curtain. And so Illustrious had these down when this attack happened. And the bombs inside that land inside the hangar blow these into smithereens and send basically bars of steel flying through the entire hangar deck, shredding all sorts of stuff, aircraft, people, equipment, firefighting equipment, importantly, just shredding it to pieces. Teaching the Royal Navy a very important lesson that this is a bad idea. These curtains are replaced later with asbestos curtains, which have other health concerns, but are less likely to explode and shatter everywhere and kill everybody in the hangar. But HMS Illustrious, incredible warship, but it's not the only interesting ship in this group. Because, yeah, the photo I have here of the Illustrious, no, that's not Illustrious. That's not. This here with the bow explosion, this is in Newport News. This is in the U.S. There's several other photos of her rebuild in the U.S. A lot of people will cite the bomb report from the captain after, like, immediately after the bombing. That report is considered inaccurate, but it's what a lot of the sources, secondary sources, including this book, use as their source for the bombing. There is a second report done in tandem with the U.S. engineers and Royal Navy engineers in the U.S. that has a different outcome that is far worse than the original report is. And that's where I get a lot of the 500-pound bomb claims from. Illustrious is not the only incredible carrier of this class, because we're going to talk about a U.S. carrier now, the USS Robin.
Excuse me?
Exactly.
It's my name? Yes?
In 1942, the U.S. is down to essentially one aircraft carrier.
Oh, what am I doing? It's way too early.
The Enterprise is out of business. She's taken damage and been through the ringer, everything that Japan could throw at her. He's taken it by this point. She's going to be out of business for several months, under repair. Saratoga is the only American carrier operational in the Pacific at this time. And they consider USS Ranger not capable of operating in the Pacific. U.S. president reaches out to Britain for, or maybe not the president, but the U.S. reaches out to Britain for assistance and requests 2 aircraft carriers for service in the Pacific for temporarily. Negotiations happen, and they agree on keeping Ranger in the Atlantic and sending 1 aircraft carrier to both cooperate with and work in the Pacific for a time. They choose HMS Victorious for this role. Victorious goes across or sails through a storm to Newport News and gets completely redone in the U.S. to U.S. standards. They have to retrain the crew into U.S. methods, because you got to keep in mind U.S. methods at the time were doing cross-deck things. So you'd have planes from other carriers landing on the ship, so they all have to use the same landing methods.
Yeah, the doctrine was very different from what I've heard on a couple of videos from Drac. So.
Yeah. And one of the things that was very different was the landing operator. So the guy standing on the deck with like flags or whatever, like telling the person how to land. Basically, everything that the British Navy did was the opposite of what the U.S. Navy did in terms of their landing operators. So in the British Navy, and that might be backwards on this, British Navy, if the operator has his flags up, you're too high. And so you need to go down. Or actually, no, sorry. If the British operator is, if you have flags up, you need to go up. And the American Navy is, if you have flags up, you need to go down.
Oh, wow.
It's inverted controls, basically, you know? And so the Royal Navy pilots who are going to be operating on this ship need to relearn the U.S. system in order to not crash on the U.S. carriers and that sort of thing if they have to land on Saratoga. And so they have to relearn that up is down and down is up, and a bunch of different things in order to do this. And they spend a lot of time and several months in the United States working on this. And so HMS Victorious serves with the U.S. Navy with a Royal Navy crew wearing U.S. uniforms, flying U.S. aircraft with U.S. paint jobs, and U.S. Radio liaisons and officers helping out here and there in the Pacific for about a year. And so from like late 1942 to late 1943, Victorious is in the Pacific, and her radio code name is USS Robin, and so it's a fake United States carrier with United States aircraft, but it's actually a Royal Navy carrier with a Royal Navy crew, wearing U.S. uniforms. because the Royal Navy uniforms at the time were not updated for Pacific service, so they used the U.S. ones. And so Saratoga and Victorious tear around the Pacific. Eventually, Enterprise comes back into the business, and the Essex class start coming online in the late 1943, and Victorious can go home and serve back in the Mediterranean and the Atlantic waters. Victorious goes on to attack Tirpitz in a rather famous raid, in 1944, and does other things, and then comes back to the Pacific later on in the British Pacific Fleet, because basically all the carriers end up making it out there. Formidable is probably most famous for taking a kamikaze hit. She did do a lot of things in the Mediterranean. All these ships did, but I'm not going to go into too many details about it. Illustrious is also famous for the attack on Toronto, and so that whole thing was was done by HMS Illustrious. Formidable is famous for being the only carrier, only fleet carrier at least, to participate in the line of battle. During the Battle of Cape Matapan, Formidable was not given any specific orders, so it stayed in the battle line with the battleships, the British battle line. This is nighttime. You know, the Italians don't know what's happening. They don't know that something bad is going to happen. So the order to open fire is given, and Formidable joins the battleships. She fires in the opening salvo with her 4.5-inch guns on the Italian cruisers. And as soon as that's noticed, she's ordered out of the line. But she gets to fire a salvo. And so, a couple questions here about USS Robin. I don't think they used the U.S. rank names, and they did not adopt U.S. rules, because if a Royal Navy carrier has to adopt U.S. rules specifically regarding alcohol, things are not going to go well with that crew. Because U.S. rules at the time was that the U.S. Navy was a dry service. There was no alcohol allowed, or at least issued, on U.S. Navy warships. But in the British Navy, very much the grog ration was still a thing. And so if you took alcohol away from Royal Navy crewmen, you're going to have a bad time. And so, of course, there was trading going on. Famously, the thing that was traded between the two ships was that the Royal Navy would trade alcohol for ice cream, because U.S. Navy ships all have ice cream machines. And so that was sort of the thing. Sometimes they'd trade Coca-Cola, but mostly it was ice cream. Another thing is, like, the U.S. service with Robin teaches the Royal Navy a lot, and it also teaches the U.S. Navy a lot about aircraft fighter control and radar, how to do some cool tricks with radar, how to operate mass carrier strikes, and a lot of these sorts of things, and also ship design philosophy. All of this gets shared between the Royal Navy and the U.S. Navy, and the two kind of merge in terms of their design philosophies and operational philosophies towards the end of the war, to kind of a mixture of both.
Oh, that's the wrong.
Yeah. I don't know about the Royal Navy epaulets or sleeves or caps or whatever. I don't know what that thing was. My understanding is that they adopted the full U.S. uniform and just adapted to it, but I could be wrong with that. And Promedible, of course, as I mentioned, is also famous for the battle line engagement. She also took a kamikaze. All three of these carriers took kamikaze hits during their service in the Pacific, which it comes in late of the war, late 44 and throughout 45. The British are involved in the Pacific Fleet, and it's kind of a forgotten bit of history. But the British are very much involved in the 1945 portion of the Pacific War. And so Formidable takes a kamikaze hit, and it does a lot of damage. That's a lot of damage. but the thing is that all these carriers take kamikaze hits, but none of them really get knocked out of action by them. Illustrious takes a pretty big one when it gets set on fire. The fire gets put out. She never gets taken completely out of action. Formidable loses a few hours of service due to firefighting and that sort of thing, due to a kamikaze hit. And Victorious also takes a few and keeps going. Because the thing is with an armored carrier deck is that an aircraft is not an armor-piercing projectile. It doesn't matter how much explosive you pack onto a Zero, it's not going to go through 3 inches of armor. There's a famous picture online of one hit, I think it was a county class cruiser in the armor belt, and didn't go through. And there's like a shadow of where the plane was. And so a lot of the times where these planes would hit a US carrier and set fires and things would be ripped up and ripped to shreds, the British carriers, you'd have a crater and then you could just kind of put a plank over it and or sweep off the dirt and keep going. Armored carriers do have their benefits. They have their trade-offs, but they're absolutely the design that the Royal Navy probably wanted for World War II, and did serve well. So let's see. Moving on from the Illustrious class, you have the fourth quote-unquote Illustrious, the kind of the solo ship, the HMS Indomitable. Basically, Indomitable is a bigger Illustrious with a second hangar. So they found that they could reduce the side armor of the hangars to 1.5 inches from 4.5 inches. So you take away 3 inches of armor, and you could add 14 feet to the height of the ship and put another hangar in there. So the thing with Indomitable is that the second hangar, so the top hangar, is 14 feet high, and the bottom hangar is 16 feet high, if I remember right, roughly. And so that means that Indomitable has the problem of carriers, or of some of the Royal Navy aircraft carriers, where she can't operate all the same aircraft that the others can, and including especially the US F-4U Corsair, which is pretty inarguably the best carrier fighter from World War II, at least in the end of the war. And so that's kind of a bummer that Indomitable couldn't really operate that plane, but she gets F6F Hellcats, so that's fine. Hellcats are still incredibly capable fighters at the time, and more than enough for combat in the Pacific. The thing with Indomitable is that they wanted 48 airplanes instead of 36. Of course, there's more due to deck parking, but that's the design capacity. They reduced the hangar sides, gained 14 feet in a second hangar. The problem with the Corsairs, as I've been mentioning, is that unlike other aircraft of the time, the wings do not fold backwards or sideways or anything like that. The wings fold upwards in the Corsairs. And so your hangar height in a US warship is standardized at 15.7 feet or something like this, or 15 feet 7 inches. And so Corsairs are designed to operate in that, not in a 14-foot hangar. And so the Royal Navy was able to get around that in some of their ships by adopting folding wingtips, and also cut short wingtips on the Corsairs and get them to fit into the 15-foot or the 16-foot hangars. But it doesn't really work out for Indomitable or Implacable, in fact. And so they have to operate Hellcats and Seafires, which both are good enough fighters, but they're not as good as the Corsairs were for naval combat. Indomitable comes out. She serves through most of the war. Takes place in the Mediterranean, or fights in the Mediterranean, fights in the North Atlantic, fights in the British Pacific Fleet. If I remember right, she takes a kamikaze too, survives it, survives the war, but doesn't see much service after the war, unlike the smaller Illustrious class. due to the hangar size, largely. I need some water, but I think we are out of it. Regardless, the thing that comes after Indomitable is the Implacable class. So there are two Implacables. There's Implacable, there is Indefatigable. And essentially these are just even more airplanes. We want a bigger second hangar in an Indomitable class. So they take the Illustrious class hull, they extend it by 26 feet, which is roughly 7 meters, and 7.5 meters. So they extend it, they add a fourth rotary shaft to it. So instead of 3 shafts like in the Illustrious class and the Ark Royal class, you have 4 shafts now, which propels the ship ideally above 31 knots to 33-ish to 34 knots. The design hope was going to get to 35. I don't think it ever really reached that. But it's all in the same hull form, so they had to kind of really cram 4 shafts into a 3 shafts hull form. But it works out. And they also wanted to pack in more armor again, but it didn't. That didn't quite work. But they got some armor back. Both of the hangars on the Implacable class are 14-foot hangars, which means they cannot operate Corsairs again, but they still manage to do Sea Fires, some Hellcats, as well as the TBF Avengers, and also Ferry Barracudas. Those sorts of aircraft worked fine. And so
damn it.
Yeah, and so, but the thing with the Implacables is that these are the shortest serving aircraft carriers in the Royal Navy, because essentially they can't keep up with the times as well as some of the other carriers due to this hangar size limitation. There was some modernization plans to basically cut the middle deck between the 2 hangars and make it one big hangar, but that doesn't go through due to the costs, and so that just doesn't happen. And then after the ships following this are the Audacious class, which are just even larger monster carriers. So kind of Audacious was supposed to be the third Implacable. They redesigned to do an almost complete redesign, add a transom stern to it, change a bunch of different stuff. They do USN. They standardize on USN hangar height because they realize by this point most of their planes are going to be coming from the US, because they've adopted the Avenger, they've adopted the Martlet, which is what they call the Wildcat, they've adopted the Hellcat, they've adopted the Corsair. So they adopt just USN standards. And so they design it to that. There 2 of these ships are completed. One of them is renamed from Audacious to HMS Eagle. And then another one is called Ark Royal. So it's Ark Royal 3. As normally what we call it, if I'm right, or Ark Royal 4, one of the 2. But they, and these ships see service throughout the Cold War. There was another design that was proposed for the Royal Navy called the Malta Class. There was hopefully going to be 4 of them, but these ships did not get completed. They're kind of the UK's equivalent of the Essex class, mixed a little bit with the Midway class. It's more or less the UK returning to an unarmored design. So Malta has a lot of similarities to the Essex. Lots of aircraft, near 100 or more aircraft, unarmored, basically, mass strike group attacks, kind of the Ark Royal design philosophy again. Side elevators as well, which is similar to the Essex and indeed the Midway. And then they were going to have a 6-inch armored deck underneath the hangars, so above the boilers and engine rooms and the magazines. But that is where we leave off. The Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers, there is a couple other aircraft carriers that served in the Cold War. including the Colossus class, the Majestic class, the Sea Service, and things like the Australian Navy and the Canadian Navy. These are, and also HMS Unicorn, quite famously, is not an aircraft carrier, but looks like one. But I've omitted these ships just for the sake of brevity in this live stream, so that we can get through it. And of course, the Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers are coming online nowadays. Quite famously, they have 2 islands, which actually reportedly, according to some of the designers involved in the project, they went and looked at Hermes, HMS Hermes documents from when she had 2 islands designed to help convince Parliament that that was a good idea. And so there are a bunch of other designs, but the Royal Navy has evolved away from being a carrier navy and then evolved back into it now, and is one of the main carrier navies in the world now, thanks to the new Queen Elizabeth class. Which class was given to the Royal Canadian Navy? That was the Majestic class, mostly. And I can't remember which ones in the Majestic class was given to Canada, but there was 1 or 2 of them that made it over there. So, okay, why on PC World of Warships says the Audacious is just a design. So the Audacious on PC is not the same design that she was completed in reality as Eagle. So it's based on like kind of the designs that they had in progress that they ended up changing over time. So Victorious is really the only Illustrious class that receives a massive refit. She gets an angled flight deck quite famously, and she participates throughout the Cold War and has quite a long service life for how much she did during World War II. Let's see. You got there's a CVA-01 or CV-01 design, which is just an even more massive aircraft carrier that never got around to building it. But why did Furious have an 18-inch gun? So, as designed, Furious was going to be more or less a large light cruiser with 2 18-inch guns. Kind of a battle cruiser, but not really a battle cruiser in any sort of sense of the word. It was part of kind of Admiral Fisher's Baltic project, so it's going to be kind of a lightweight ship designed for shore bombardment with 18-inch guns. It was not a good idea.
Habakkuk. Oh God.
Yeah. So Habakkuk was a kind of a cooperative design plan between the UK and the US, mostly the UK and Canada, to build a aircraft carrier out of pykrete, which is not ice, but a ice mixture. And this would have been a mammoth of a warship. The reason they wanted this was they wanted something basically unsinkable, more or less, Titanic style. If you make the ship out of iceberg, it can't be sunk by an iceberg. And the point of it was basically we want a ship in the middle of the Atlantic that will fill what's called the Atlantic Gap. So during the point of the early 1940s, aircraft could not cover all of the Atlantic against submarines. So the point of Habakkuk was to fill that gap with a giant, almost island-sized aircraft carrier that was capable of operating strategic bombers, essentially. I can't comment on the recent F-35 crash on Queen Elizabeth because I've only heard that it happened. I don't know any details about it, so I'm not going to open that can of worms. So let's see. Do we have any, this is kind of question times if anybody has any questions now that we've gotten through things. Yeah.
Chat, I apologize about the gameplay. I had like one good game with Implacable, like 100k and got 3 kills, but this is like my first time playing CVs in a while,
long, yeah.
and for this long as well. So it's an experience. Like you should not be doing this. I'm just gonna stay right there. Hey, historical Scharnhorst. You know, it's a German ship. Let's get it.
Well, I mean, they tried to bomb that thing into oblivion. Mostly that was land-based aircraft, but you look at the surrounding city. There's aerial photos of where the Scharnhorst and Brest, of where the Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were, and it looks like a moonscape after all the bombing they did to it. So, was there a change on British CVs that made me go, why? I wouldn't say there was a change on them. The only thing that made me question why was the Ark Royal's hangar layout and hangar and elevator layout. It just does not make any sense. Why would you do it like that? Everything else in the Royal Navy carrier design tree more or less makes sense and can be explained, especially within the context of what the Royal Navy expected its carriers to do. And the aircraft that it was expecting to do them with. How does the Illustrious class compare to the Graf Zeppelin class? They were both really heavy. I would take an Illustrious over a Graf Zeppelin any day of the week, mostly because they actually have airplanes. But the Illustrious class, so the Illustrious class aren't as heavy as you think they are. They're in the mid-20s of 20,000s of tons. Graf Zeppelin is a little bit larger than that. The thing with her is that she's just not very well designed. Do I have a favorite out of the UK carriers? I gotta say the Illustrious class gotta be my favorite. They're not in game, unfortunately. Maybe at some point they'll appear. Hood's sisters as carrier conversions, better than Courageous class? I mean, yeah. The Hood's sisters as carrier conversions, in an ideal world, they would have basically ended up being like the Lexingtons. The Lexingtons were fantastic aircraft carriers, even if they were conversions. They were still competitive with a lot of the second generation aircraft carriers. So if the Royal Navy decided, instead of going with Courageous and Glorious, going with the Hood's hulls, they probably would have gotten a better ship out of it. Did France have any aircraft carrier designs post-World War II or even before? So France had a lot of aircraft carrier designs out there, a lot of them. They had an aircraft carrier under construction during World War II, the Joffre, and they were hoping to get it online before anything happened. Of course, that's not how history worked. And they've had a history of working with aircraft carriers since then. They've adopted some of the Independence class and Saipan class aircraft carriers after World War II. Then, of course, now they have the operational carrier Charles de Gaulle, and they announced plans this year to create a new one by the 2030s. So France has an aircraft carrier history. Baron was not a good part of that history. Lion is not going to be the new campaign ship. Minotaur will be. How would UK carriers rank up against their peers? US, German, IJM. Well, so UK carriers, So the dilemma is that they have a smaller flight package than basically any of their peers, but they also have armor protection and different ways of operating. Like in my opinion, the UK carriers stack up pretty well against other Navy's aircraft carriers. The weakness of them is the airplanes that they have. Through most of the war, the British aircraft are just not as capable as Japanese aircraft or US aircraft in terms of their performance. In terms of what the Royal Navy needs in the interwar years, yeah, they're great aircraft. In terms of what they need in wartime, not exactly. PC did not have Victorious as a premium. The closest thing PC has to an Illustrious class is the Indomitable as a premium. Oh yeah, we have a Hermes hat around here somewhere. Is it here? I don't remember. Do you know where the Hermes hat is, Robin?
The Hermes hat.
Yeah.
I actually don't know.
Somebody mentioned it in chat. But we have a hat.
Oh, it's behind. No, I know what you're talking about. I haven't seen it though. I'm not sure where it went.
Yeah, I don't know where it went, but there's one around here somewhere. So the HMS we have a hat from HMS Hermes. We don't know. I don't know if it's World War I or the Cold War Hermes because there was a later one. And the later one was HMS Hermes, and then it got transferred to the Indian Navy, and has recently been scrapped by the Indians. So unfortunately, we didn't get to save that one. I think that was one of the Colossus class aircraft carriers. So I'm not sure if the hat comes from the World War II one or the Colossus one, but there is a hat around here that says Hermes. I can't say what line it is yet. It is a ship that is coming. It will be a premium. Why did the Parseval Transformer F-15 sound like propeller airplanes? Because our old sound system didn't let us do that, but that will be fixed in the future. Will be fixed. I think about Germany's plan to convert De Grasse into a light carrier. De Grasse is already a small cruiser. That would have been bad. No. There are many people or many nations wanted to do things like this. U.S. really are the only ones that really pulled it off with the Independence class, and even those were kind of limited.
Chat, that's gonna be the last game I'm gonna do for CVs.
Yep. No problem.
I'm gonna play a British ship, but that's enough CVs for one day for me. It's fun. I had fun doing it, and I hope you guys had fun as well watching it. But boy,
yeah, Warspite, like Warspite has the history to have been saved as a museum. It did not have the structural integrity to be saved as a museum. It was being held together by its armored belt. It was not in a good state. Would have cost an astronomical amount of money to put it into a good state. So it wouldn't have happened. King George V, maybe you could probably pull some strings, some alternate history, and get that to happen.
Oh, there was Transformer music during the CV. I'm sorry, I don't have my I don't have the audio backup, so I apologize if there was some sound effect that was not historical. My bad.
Oh, it's a Centaur class. Thank you, Sid. Colossus starts with a C. Centaur starts with a C. Yeah, there was a lot of plans to do things with Jean Bar. There was, hybrid BV CV plans. There was an AA BB plan for it. There was a bunch of different stuff. Yeah. That would be bad. So just like any of the design Germans had for carriers. Pretty much. Germany, I don't think quite got how carriers worked. Putting a turtleback in a carrier is not a good idea. You want internal volume. Turtlebacks do not give you internal volume. How does the Royal Navy name their ships? So Royal Navy ships are named when they are approved for ordering, if I remember right. And they tend to go with virtuous names for things that are called capital ships, so battleships and carriers. So the virtue names are going to be like Illustrious, like Formidable, and like things like that. Sometimes they go with historical names for that. With destroyers, they will pick a letter of the alphabet and will stick with that letter and then do a bunch of different names like Daring or Lafori and like Legion and Jervis. Although with the Cossack class or the tribal class destroyers, they did tribes, like tribes of the empire, and that sort of thing. So there's a bunch of different naming conventions that the Royal Navy has, and they don't really stick with one for a class, which is inconvenient. That was one of the many holdups for Graf Zeppelin. So another part of the holdup for Graf Zeppelin is just getting the Luftwaffe to do anything in terms of cooperating with the Navy. The Luftwaffe and Navy relationship was not good for the Germans throughout most of the war. And so Graf Zeppelin would have been a political nightmare for them to even operate. And also they have to learn how to operate a carrier during wartime because they don't have any carrier experience, which learning how to basically operate a carrier does not take that long. But learning how to really use one and use it effectively, that takes a lot of time. And that's something that Germany did not have during World War II. Honestly, how much work they put into Graf Zeppelin still surprises me because it's not logical to do. Was it IJN versus IJA bad? No. But it was still bad. Actually, it might be similar to how bad. You think that without overseas holdings, there's a good reason for Germany to have presume such small air groups. So, like, with Germany's grand plans to do massive surface raiding, carriers kind of make sense because you can scout out things and hopefully avoid contact with the enemy. In a world before radar, they kind of make sense. But realistically speaking, by the time World War II comes around, no, Germany is not in a position to operate carriers and have them survive in any meaningful way. They can't build enough of them to compete. So the thing with Italy and Aquila is that Italy doesn't need an aircraft carrier. Basically Italy can cover most of the Mediterranean with shore-based aircraft, especially with the extent of their empire at that time. They could just fly off of the land and just use land-based aircraft. They didn't have a reason to need an aircraft carrier, an area to cover with one. And the same could be said for Britain. They had a lot of areas that they could cover with shore-based aircraft thanks to Malta. I'm not sure, I don't have any details on how Graf Zeppelin was sank, so I'm not going to comment on that really, because not very many people, that's a very rather unknown part of history even today. So, yeah. Yeah, Aquila was an Italian aircraft carrier that they were working on. They never completed. She would have been, she was small. Also, Italy doesn't have any experience with aircraft carriers. They also don't have, at this time, and they don't have the aircraft to run on them. It would not have been a good idea to finish her. She wouldn't have been super capable. Especially with how many carriers Britain was wanting to put into the Mediterranean. Would have just given them the excuse to put more of them. Favorite British ship in World of Warships? So in Legends, my favorite British ship is probably, I want to say Duke of York, just because she's an underdog. People pick on her. And she sank the Scharnhorst, which is a cool history bit. Yeah, Graf Zeppelin did survive the war, and she was sent to Russia as like a war reparation. She was sunk by the Russians. The details of those trials where the Russians tried to sink her, I don't know much about. I do know that for a long time it was kind of unknown what happened to her. Until relatively recently. Yeah, Graf Zeppelin, or GF. If you're talking about Graf Zeppelin, yeah, she never saw service. She got about 90% completed, but she never got finished. You could say for today, Russia, they don't need more than one carrier, and they can cover most of their interested area from the mainland. Yeah, especially with the current aspirations, they don't need carriers that much. And the carrier that they have is questionable at best. If I remember right, it's technically in the Royal Navy class, or in the Russian Navy, not even classified as an aircraft carrier, but as like a missile cruiser, aviation missile cruiser, something like that. They don't really consider it a carrier either. It's good at catching on fire. It does that every once in a while. You keep an eye on it. It has not been announced what Lion will be, so I can't answer that question, I'm sorry. But Lion will be here next update, which is on Monday, next Monday.
Oh, this Wichita is killing me, dude.
You know, he knows what he's doing.
No, he's also extremely lucky.
Yeah.
There's this factor that, there's also this factor of extreme luck of not dying.
You've probably looked into it more than me, Carly Crawford. So that's, it's possible that they had problems sinking her.
At least my team is winning this one.
I mean, Germany builds ships tough, for the most part. I wouldn't say the Nurembergs are built tough, but the battleships, definitely, they were built tough. It's undeniable. But it's like, Graf Zeppelin is built with a turtle back in it. Like, why? Why? You want as much internal volume as you can have in an aircraft carrier for airplanes, and a turtleback takes that away from you. I don't know anything about Chinese aircraft carriers, so I can't comment on the Type 3. Yeah, there's some potential UK carriers. I mean, the Malta Class, for example, the Audacious, as designed, is an example. The CVA-01, of course, the Havoc. There's a few light carrier designs that are out there that aren't present. Royal Navy had a lot more carriers than I covered in this, but a lot of them weren't fleet carriers, or were not very good carriers, or weren't necessarily very important to the development. So I cut them for brevity. Well, so yeah, I don't know. I doubt that they would want the Graf Zeppelin to face a battleship alone. I mean, they already learned what happens whenever a battleship goes against a carrier, but that happened after design was already settled, so I'll let that go. But it's a good meme. Graf Zeppelin fits in the part of the picture of that was going to be Plan Z. Plan Z But even then, it's not great. No, it's the other way around, Ben. The U.S. borrowed a CV from the U.K. that was victorious. They might have borrowed a escort carrier or two, but I'm not sure of that. But in terms of fleet carriers, the U.S. borrowed one from the U.K., not the other way around. There were some talks about Ranger, but the U.S. didn't want to give it up. So. The Ark Royal coming to the game in the near future. She has not been announced, so no.
I'm not a fan of enemies who just drag the game like this. Just come on, let's finish this.
What do I know about the rivalry between the IJN and the Imperial Army? That it was bad. Like, IJN and the Imperial Army, and it goes back decades. Essentially, it goes back at least to the 1870s, to the Meiji Reformation, and two different philosophies on how they should be looking towards the future. The Navy wanted to go south and eastward, and the Army wanted to go westward and north in terms of their strategic goals, and all of that led to just crazy inter-service rivalry and hatred between the two of them. What class of carrier came right before the current QE class? That would be the Invincible class aircraft carriers. I think there were two of them, an Invincible and Ark Royal. I could be wrong on that. But they came out before the QE class. There was a gap of 10 to 15 years where the Royal Navy did not have any aircraft carriers.
I don't know where they went. I think they're both on this corner, which is just... What? Okay, chat. I again apologize about the gameplay. It's just, yeah. I'm trying my best.
You're winning.
Yes, I am.
Matter how
I mean, it has been the most boring game I've potentially ever played. Literally just running around in a circle for the last 10 minutes doing nothing. Ah, there you are. There you go. The game's over.
Robbed.
My sanity is gone. It's time to wrap it up for me, at least. If you have any more questions for Princeblip, please go ahead. He's all yours. But I am out of here for a while.
Yeah. So, thank you everybody for coming for our first carrier history stream. I hope you look forward to the next update. We have a lot of stuff coming in the next update. Of course, Minotaur being finally here. And finally a campaign for the Royal Navy, stuff for the Royal Navy, and a little bit more. Hope everybody was entertained. I hope I didn't get too much stuff wrong. I probably got a few minor details here and there wrong. But I encourage everybody to go and kind of read up about these ships, because a lot of their stories are not in the limelight in the same way that U.S. aircraft carriers are, like, famous Enterprise and Essex class and that sort of thing. Definitely check out Armored Carriers on YouTube, spelled with a U in armor. That's one of the main sources I use for this, as well as this book by David Hobbs. You may have seen it in the background of a stream a few update streams ago. As well as David K. Brown's series of books. And I think there's another one by R.A. Burt, which is also highly respected. So, sounds good. You have anything else to say, Robin?
I am. I'm good to go. I hope you guys enjoyed this this stream. There was definitely less content in game to check out, since, well, there's only 3 British aircraft carriers in the game so far. Yeah, I mean, again, thank you for Blip for carrying on this stream as well, with a steady flow of information. I'm always I always appreciate to help him out on this sort of streams.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And thank you very much. So I know you don't like playing carriers, and I had to
It's
force
okay.
you to
It's
a couple
okay.
hours.
I had my share of fun, but it's just not my cup of tea. That's it. I think the impact they have on the game is very decent. I mean, you can just put on demand, and I had some good moments, but I just don't have a lot of fun playing them. So I hope I didn't make a fool of myself because I know you guys are gonna be like, oh my god, he pre-dropped. Oh my god, he did that. He used EM now. Why? What a noob. And yes, I am a noob, but it's not the matter. We had a bunch of announcements on these streams, and I hope that you appreciate that as well. Before we go, I'll play the teaser one more time for you guys, even if it's supposed to be uploaded on YouTube already.
Yep.
So yeah, everyone, have a fantastic rest of your Monday, and we will see you on the next stream, which supposedly is not announced yet, but I mean there will be at least one more stream before the end of the year.
Yep.
So yes.
Happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Have a good time, everyone.
We'll see you next time.
Get ready for Monday.
Oh yeah. Bye-bye.